we were discussing this earlier, Ice Cube getting into some trouble because Ice Cube basically says the most rational thing on the planet. If you want our vote, you should represent our interests, and you shouldn't get our vote if you don't. And when he put it up for Trump, Trump said, come on. Democrats, not so much. Because for Democrats, the black vote is supposed to be given without regard. The thing that you get out of it is protection from the Republican. That's it. Don't ask for policy. Don't ask for them to represent your interests because they're not. Ice Cube is realizing, hey, that doesn't make sense. That's not in our interest. How is that not in our interest? You know, what's interesting, Nixon, there was a point where Martin Luther King was doing something similar. And I'm not comparing Ice Cube to Martin Luther King. That's a horrible comparison. But in regards to King putting it out there, there was a chance that Nixon could have took that message. I mean, what you ended up with was Bobby Kennedy giving it to Robert. But when it boiled down to it, it could have actually been responded to by Nixon, meaning the letters that King was writing and putting it out there for support. And so Ice Cube says the most rational thing in the world, we should be represented. We need somebody to represent our interests. And Democrats who get 90% of the Democratic vote are incentivized by that 90% to not do that because you already get it. Meaning, despite all of the support that you give, you are fantastically weak. That needs to change. And the only way that changes is if for people, whether it's African Americans, whether it's Hispanics, the left, the right, whatever, for the public itself, on the things to which they agree with, assert that and assert that you're not getting their support without backing those items. And until that changes, nothing changes. This is a fear thing. And the fear in this case is using Trump or whatever Republican as a boogeyman. And what the Democrats realize that that's not going to get any better. I mean, Tom Cotton is waiting in the wings. Ted Cruz is waiting in the wings. I saw something about Donald Trump running in 2024 if he loses again.
It's no shock that Ice Cube got some heat for deciding to work with the Trump administration. He wants to deal with it. I want to understand it. So should you. So here is Ice Cube on Prime Time. Thank you for taking the opportunity, brother. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Chris, your lead-ins are a little misleading.
How so?
Well, the Platinum Plan is not my plan. I came up with the Contract with Black America, and I didn't run to go work with any campaign. Both campaigns contacted me. Both campaigns wanted to talk to me about the Contract with Black America. One campaign said, we love what you have, but let's really dig into it after the election. And one campaign said, we love what you have. Do you mind talking to us about it? And that's what I did. So I didn't run to nobody. And so that was real misleading to me. Anybody who can make this happen, I want to make happen. I just explained to them that if this is not going directly to Black Americans, then it's not really helping. It's actually just perpetuating what's already there.
There's a lot of people who went and met Trump that are asking you, why'd you meet Trump? There's a lot of people who are not.
I never met Trump.
Well, Trump's administration. Okay. Yeah. Now, what I will say is, as ADOS, we've been down ballot Democrat the whole time. It's my firm belief that small government, right-wing Republicans cannot deliver the robust agenda that we need from our Black agenda on ADOS101.com, been up about 2 years now, and also reparations in the trillions of dollars that we're talking about. It will take a massive movement either to remove the Democrats left or a third party.
Jared is here. So we have Dr. Jared Ball, a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and author of the new book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. It describes the origins and the myth of Black buying power, the rhetoric around that myth, and the contextualization of how it's propagated. He is also curator of imixwhatilike.org.
Dr. Ball, thank you again for being with us. We also wanted to talk with you about this interaction, sort of emblematic interaction between Ice Cube and Chris Cuomo. Can you, this is basically, we're just talking about this right before we brought you in at the beginning of the last segment. We're talking about Black misrepresentation in the political system, specifically in the Democratic Party, This has been going on for decades at this point. I'm a spectator on this, but I hear it's pretty frustrating, and I wanted to get your take on the interaction this weekend. What do you think it means, not just in terms of this election cycle, but maybe in terms of the wider political sea changes and shifts happening in our society? Where do you think this is going to go? First of all, what do you think about this interaction? But how do you think this is going to play out politically, Dr. Ball?
Well, first, it's a good way to even answer the question you all were asking before the break, that when the problem Ice Cube was representing in his exchange with Cuomo and CNN, and even I would argue within some of the black press spaces like Roland Martin's show, where more or less he did the same thing, and had a similar interaction. What he's doing is exposing the flawed or fraudulent, as I might say, nature of the political system, which Princeton University has already shown as if we really needed it, but put some science behind it, or further science behind it. The claim that we are not a democracy in this country, but an oligarchy, in their 2014 study, which basically showed that regardless of party, regardless of candidate or which party is in power, over I think a 20-year period that they were studying, if not longer, it showed that if the elite don't support the proposed policy, it doesn't get passed. So so we live in a class-dominated, oligarchy, So when people like Ice Cube break with these sort of party norms and electoral campaign or season norms by raising questions about a campaign or a candidate or a party that he's not supposed to, that's what I think the response is really viscerally all about. Cuomo, Roland Martin, others, even people on Twitter wanting to cancel Ice Cube. The visceral response that has been encouraged over, more than, at least decades of promoting the Democratic Party as the only viable option, and voting generally as the only option people have to make change. This is what we end up with. It's an intentionally limited range of conversation that allows for this kind of back and forth to occur. So when Ice Cube simply says, I want something for black people, and Biden won't talk to me until after the election, meaning vote for me and then I'll do something for you without a promise, which is the opposite way that organized and politically intelligent people and groups move. Trump is at least saying, let me give you the dog and pony show and run some game in advance of the election, in the hopes of garnering a few more black votes. So regardless, my whole point is, regardless of what people think about Cube's idea or his relationship or willingness to talk to Trump, it is the response from the Democratic Party and liberal media establishment that I think is very telling, that it is there to corral people who might raise certain questions. Now, my concern would be, in addition to all of that, would be, well, why is Cube in a position to be such a popular spokesperson on behalf of black politics in the first place?
It's because the majority of our politicians, academics, and activists have been co-opted or bought off and made completely ineffective. On top of that, these people have been disconnected from the communities that they claim to be fighting for. So when they talk about their solutions, it seems completely foreign to the needs of those people. And to get into a lot of the positions that you currently have, you had to cater to the perspectives of white people. And it seems like you're only acclimated to do that type of thing at this point in time. But even if we're completely wrong about you, we have years and years, decades and decades of a lot of you failing to produce results for the black community. And here's the funny part. Jared Ball would probably agree with everything I just said, except that he probably thinks that he's outside of that paradigm just because he's a fucking leftist.
And why, secondly, is his tendency or willingness to go talk to Trump rather than talk to people maybe to the left of Biden in the hopes of building some sort of option that may not happen this election, but maybe more viable for the next one.
Because the leftists lost this election. They lost the last election too. They don't have any fucking power in American politics. why the fuck would we turn to the fucking left? Especially when you're not willing to fight for the shit that we need, because it's too far left. We are in a fucked up situation, and we cannot wait for you motherfuckers to get your shit together.
By the way, I think it's disgusting, and I want to use that term intentionally, and not just unfortunate, it's disgusting, politically despicable, and unfortunate that Ice Cube had found some allegiance with this ADOS group that has popped up online and put a very conservative spin on radical black politics and calls for reparations. So it's unfortunate that he was giving them more popularity.
Wow. When did this film develop? Weren't you just on an ADOS affiliated YouTube show?
We are in a place where it's like so important to advocate for policies to actually to close this racial wealth gap. Like
Right.
we need policies, we need reparations.
Right.
There's to me, there's no fight about this. It shouldn't be fight about this at all, because like the data corroborates what is absolutely needed, because like all these particular things that you even espouse in your particular book is about, like, you know, black buying power at $1.4 trillion, and it's not even something that we had. Even when Mr. Johnson pulled that particular number out the sky for the $15 billion in collective income, so we got that money to spend, but we really don't, and we even didn't have it at that particular time. It was just kind of like, you know, I almost feel like, you know, it's like a whole like trick bag was actually played to say that you got something that we really don't.
And you know, look, the question for me, and this might be, well, I know as we approach the end, it's not a good time to bring up a point of possible disagreement, but it's not that I don't think reparations is deserved. I just think tactically it's never going to be given. In part because I just think tactically it's never going to be given. In part because of the propaganda that we've been talking about. White people have been convinced that they are not even successful enough because black people have been given too much already. So the idea that 2/3 of the country would vote to redistribute its wealth just to black people.
Do you see what I mean? The disconnect. I want to know what is going on in the mind of a black academic to where this, like any of this, computes. So you write books and you give lectures about race, mainly to white audiences. What is the purpose of doing this if you ultimately believe white people are too far gone down the rabbit hole of white supremacy that they can't be convinced to do racial justice to the descendants of American chattel slavery? The only type of mindset that can make these things line up is if you're a fucking grifter that is using the struggle of black people for your own personal gain. Also, let's deal with this disingenuous framing of the whole situation. You think we have to convince 2/3 of the country? That's not exactly how like laws get passed in this fucking country. Now, I would agree that we have to convince the majority of America to avoid serious backlash. But in actuality, we have to convince the politicians in Congress. Weren't you in that other clip saying that we have an oligarchy?
I find that I find that difficult to conclude as possible. So this is why I keep saying, if we make the argument about the 20 trillion, then there doesn't have to be a debate about who gets what reparations wise financially.
So his argument is that white people are so racist that it is in our best interest to give up our grievance that is based on generations and generations of racial exploitation perpetrated by our government against us, and also align ourselves with them to do a wealth redistribution that ultimately will benefit them more than it benefits us, and continue on the unfair advantage that they already have. You know what? It's crazy to me that black people aren't rallying behind this.
Everybody would be taken care of, and then black people could do the personal, private things collectively in the community to heal all the other elements of reparative, associated with reparative justice that don't come financially. So in part, I don't want white America to get the feeling that, well, we gave them some money and now we're all good. And I also just don't think tactically I just don't see it happening. They won't even sign off on a House resolution to do a study that has already been proven is unnecessary. So
tune in next week when we actually talk about that study, and also because we're going to get into the study, that's a trick bag too. But I will say this though, I hear what you're saying, but I would also say, as being a student, I'm not a historian, but a student of history, no one gets anything without advocating for it. Right. And oftentimes, and even if we kind of look at like the civil rights movement, we didn't get like an actual bill passed for even like basic civil rights to say that, hey, you guys are human too, until 1964, which was 9 years after the civil rights movement actually started. So oftentimes, like a lot of these, you know, even if we can at least like get to the point where we can say that we can agree about advocating for policy that's going to be for the betterment of our community. You know, I know that I don't see anything beyond reparations, only because where we are right now, as far as like when you look at the wealth, when you look at income, when you look at even like the centuries of plunder, you know, that we have experienced. And even though like we have other groups that are like, you know, in a bad space, Black people, especially the descendants of chattel slavery, is bad. So the only thing that in this particular portion that has to happen is it's going to have to be legislation on the federal level. It has to be in order to, because like no group got wealth without government assistance.
And you know that.
That's correct.
You know that.
But that's the only reason why I'm saying tactically we would disagree, because to get that level of federal government support, we're going to need so many more people from other communities to sign off on just giving wealth to Black people. And is the part
our job as ADOS is to change minds and surprise people. So Professor, when you get your check, I'm going to expect you to take me to the bar and buy me a drink.
I'll buy you a drink without getting the check. We don't have to wait that long. I would say, I know that this is also a point of disagreement, but I think that tactically the ADOS strategy of cutting everyone off does a disservice to that movement. That the federal government support for Black people has always accompanied support from other communities to help get that Black support from the federal government. So this is the only reason why I'm saying at the level of material redistribution, there has to be some sort of collective unified effort with other communities to say, you don't have to sign over to say, cut a check to Black people. Sign over a permanent redistribution of that $20 trillion for everybody, and then everybody will be more than materially taken care of forever.
Sure. But this is what I say, sir. The government is able to do that for other groups. They're able to deal with groups in what I call a separate file. Whenever issues for Jews come up that require resources, they're dealt with in a separate file. No other communities are involved. When it comes to the American Indian, same deal. Okay,
the American Indian has not gotten anything. I don't know what they've gotten.
Well,
they live on $2 a day.
We can talk about that.
In 1972, the Indian Claims Commission decided that the government owed the Lakota tribes $17.5 million for the taking of the land. $17.5 million. Now, of course, that land is some of the most productive gold mines in American history, right, around Deadwood and Leeds, South Dakota. But that doesn't play into it, right? In 1979, the Court of Claims upheld this ruling and added 5% in simple interest. And that brought the final award to the Lakotas to $106 million. So $106 million. The Lakota tribes in unison, refused to take the money. And up to today, they still refuse to take the money, although there are moves and there are people who say, you know, the land's not coming back. We need to take the settlement. Due to interest, as it sits untouched in the Treasury, the Lakota settlement is now over $1 billion that the combined Lakota tribes have not taken.
In 1972, a settlement was reached with the tribes where they paid the tribes, I think it was somewhere in the area of between $25 and $30 million for the land that was lost.
But I think that when it comes to the case for Black people of chattel that came from chattel slavery in this country, that we have a more substantial case than any other group in this country.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing. My argument is not about deserving. Nobody deserves more than Black people in this country. That's where we agree. I don't disagree. I'm talking about tactically how to get what we deserve is where we disagree. By the way, the Jews used an international struggle that goes well beyond the Jewish community to get what Jews want. The Zionist movement is an international and multi-religious, multi-ethnic movement. Zionism.
That's true, but I will say that even in that particular vernacular, we have to still be more of a concentrated portion about what's here in the United States. The thing about it is, and I understand you're saying you're not necessarily disagreeing as far as like what we deserve as a group, but and also too, like you can and it's going to be difficult to, especially like if you're trying to get buy-in, you know, from other communities. But I will say this, that we and I wish that I had my numbers together. I will have them next week though, about how there are more communities of different people who are outside of our particular community that are actually espousing to support reparations for American descendants of slavery. And also, and I know that we have like dissenters, but you do have a growing number of actually people who are actually seeing that this is something that is absolutely necessary at this particular time.
And what form of reparations are they advocating? Do you have any idea about that? Because again, my point is that I don't want to get, well, I don't know exactly what you all are advocating in terms of reparations, and there's different ways it could be delivered. But the idea that go ahead.
Well, it's more of, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to wrap this up pretty soon.
Sure.
But it would be cash payments and also set asides, which will be multi-generational. You know, so and as far as like what that looks like, again, I don't have the time to actually go through all that right now. But it's not just cash. It will be also initiatives as well in order to help actually make a specific community whole. Right. But cash is definitely going to be a good part of that. I would push back on saying just give Black folk a $350,000 check and call it a day. That's not going to fix, you know, the issues that we're actually dealing with as a company, not as a community. But as I mentioned before, like, yes, cash is going to be definitely a big part of it, but it's also going to be other initiatives to address a lot of the different things that we are dealing with as a people, and also to help make the community whole. And on that note, I will have to say, thank you, Dr. Ball.
Thank you. And listen,
thank you so much.
If I get my check, you get one drink from me no matter what. If I get one check, it's two. If I get a check, that's two.
Because they are certainly a blackface conservative movement leading us nowhere.
You know, I do want to get to that, but I got to be honest. Not the Ice Cube with the ADOS part, but what Ice Cube is doing, he is right. Politically, strategically, ethically, at least in a very specific sense of asking the question. Now, why he's a spokesperson, I guess that's gives you this idea of the number of spokespeople you have for stuff like this. But there is something to say that politics is done when the person represents your interests and they get your vote for representing your interests. We in this country have inverted that process, where you have blacks voting for Clinton at like 90% or Obama at like 93%, like these obscene numbers. And yet it's never a demand associated with the numbers. And instead it's wringing their hands at saying that these guys take advantage of us, missing the fact that voting to the tune of 90% incentivizes that party to do to do that, to take advantage, and rationally they take advantage. So Cube making this thing saying, look, this needs to stop, and putting out he's right. But Cube is not just right for blacks. He's also right for lefties. He's right for any group, but especially within the context of the Democratic Party. Look, I don't see anything coming of this from the standpoint of what Cube does, but I do want to get into your feelings on ADOS, because that's interesting. I didn't realize that Cube had associated himself with this group. Now, explain who ADOS is for the audience, just in case they don't know who they are, and also add in your version to this group and why you're concerned that Cube has affiliated himself with this group.
Well, I mean, they go by American descendants of slaves, and their whole claim, as he said, as he championed again on CNN, is to focus exclusively on the concerns for Black Americans, not the African diaspora, not any other so-called people of color, but just Black Americans. And without, we don't have enough time to really get into too much of it, but I have a long history of engaging with them and have watched their conservative rightward shift and development of this hashtag.
All right, so for accuracy, it's American descendants of slavery. If Dr. Ball had been watching this group as closely as he suggests, then he would know that. It's very interesting, though, that these people can be so negative about ADOS, but they can't really be very specific about what exactly is the problem with what ADOS is saying. It is just some vague implications that they're putting out there, that because we're not tethering our politics to everyone else's struggle, then there has to be some nefarious motivations. What exactly is wrong with a group of people in such dire circumstances, like Black Americans who descend from American chattel slavery? What exactly is wrong with us being self-interested in our politics until we climb out of the hole that we are in?
And the whole point is to put, again, a conservative spin on a reparations movement and a Black political and Black liberation movement, which has long seen its destiny is tied with the African diaspora and other colonial movements, if not just for friendship and solidarity, but for camaraderie, but for political solidarity and tactics.
I have yet to hear what exactly makes ADOS right wing. What I am hearing from Dr. Ball is something that seems very conservative to me. And it's this appeal to tradition. Now, since we do have this tradition of political solidarity and tactics with all these other groups, according to Dr. Ball, can he illustrate to us the improvement in our social economic standings? Can he tell us how his way has led us there? If he can't show us any significant improvements, then how is it practical to continue down this same path?
So this idea that as ADOS pronounces, that we should cut ourselves off from radical traditions and other groups in struggle and say that only white America and only the U.S. government can satisfy our concerns is tactically absurd and ideologically backwards.
Oh, wow. So you're just going to completely mischaracterize the argument. Okay, so the idea is that we aren't going to align ourselves with people simply on the basis of skin color. That's idiotic. We are going to align ourselves with people who believe in our justice claim for reparations. That's what a reparations movement should do, if it actually wants to accomplish something. Also, if we're talking about who actually is responsible for our grievance, then yes, we would be talking about the American government. Like, what the fuck is the alternative? What exactly do you have in mind?
I grant that, but the question I'm still trying to iron out, and I think Mr. Farmer has for me, is this question as to whether the compensation for discrimination and the lack of equality is to be another kind of discrimination or another kind of inequality. And I think you answer that in the negative when you say that in the schools that you would establish for the previously underprivileged or the underprivileged would include schools for children, not just Negroes, but Puerto Ricans and other underprivileged persons. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, I think you're right there. I would not limit our employment demands to Negroes. I would include Puerto Ricans and other minorities throughout our country, which have been similarly discriminated against, though not for so long a period of time as Negroes.
Puerto Ricans weren't enslaved. Yeah, this is a problem that stems from slavery. And this compensation, yes, sir, this compensation is coming to people who were enslaved by the white man for 400 years. The Puerto Ricans don't even fit into this picture.
Well, they do fit into it.
No,
they do fit into it.
The problem is the Negro problem. They're not lynching Puerto Ricans.
If a dark-skinned Puerto Rican went down to Mississippi, he probably would be lynched too.
Spanish, he wouldn't be lynched.
No, they don't.
It's the Negro here, and as long as he can speak Spanish or some other language, or if he ties his head up with a turban or something, he can go anywhere in Mississippi or in your home that he desires.
You're not aware of the fact, are you, that African students have been arrested in our demonstrations in the South?
When they
speak French.
When they have been mistaken for the so-called Negro in America, they've been arrested.
So as this group has explicitly claimed that they want to or supplant, rather, people like King and Malcolm X with themselves as leaders, and rebrand those leaders as being ineffective and insufficient and inappropriate for today, their argument.
Oh, wow. All right, so this guy wants to fucking, like, manipulate people by playing on their emotions, using this whole thing to try to make us in opposition to Malcolm and Martin. It's fucking insane. Like, there's nothing to suggest that Malcolm or Martin would want to stifle anybody who wanted to take on the fight after their deaths. Like, we got to be honest there. All right? So there were going to be new leaders. That's how this shit has to go until we achieve our actual goal. And there's nothing to suggest that Malcolm or Martin would come back, see our conditions, and say that their people here in fucking America have achieved black liberation. And since we haven't achieved that goal yet, there's a lot of work to fucking do.
We suggest that Negroes vote for in the coming election.
I wouldn't suggest that they vote for any party or either party. I would suggest that the so-called Negroes become politically mature, realize the power that they hold in the field of politics, and then once the person who is running is aware that this man is awakened to the power that he holds, then that person who is running will approach that Negro on a more intelligent plane. As it is right now, most of the Negro leaders sell out to the white politicians for crumbs. And an awakening, a political awakening among Negroes will make it impossible for the present Negro leaders to sell our people out as they've been doing in the past.
Well, you do think Negroes should vote?
Negroes should do whatever is necessary to bring about a complete solution to their problem. When I say whatever is necessary, they should have the flexibility to do whatever is necessary to solve the problem.
Is an even older form of black conservatism dressed in some sort of brand new black progressivism, as they have a very slick and easily digestible initial headline. But most people who engage him, as Cuban Mitch himself, don't really have a lot of experience with black activism or politics, political organization, and are swept up in some of the headlines like black people need this and black people need that, which is of course true. But tactically speaking, the idea that we're going to get anything that we need by cutting ourselves off from everybody but white America in an expectation that white Americans will vote at the levels they would have to redistribute trillions of dollars in GDP just to black people is patently absurd, and it takes away from the very people and organizations that have been struggling for this in a wide variety of ways for decades.
He still hasn't explained what exactly makes ADOS right wing, and it sounds like he wants to do a whole lot of gatekeeping for a bunch of activists and organizations that apparently have been doing this work for decades but have yet to produce any fucking results.
And allows for this group to again claim to be the leaders of this movement while dragging us again in a very rightward and conservative reactionary direction. And that's what they're doing with CUBE. So CUBE should be raising these questions with the real left and trying to build with us, as opposed to being dragged over to the right and sitting with Trump and whoever. The valid questions he's raising should be dealt with among more radical and experienced activists and organizations. But this is what ADOS is here to do, and this is what it's successfully doing in this case and unfortunately some others.
I mean, do you see how full of shit these people are? Nothing that Ice Cube has said or done would suggest that he is actively seeking out the right wing. What he's seeking out is people in power. The left is not in power. And the reality is that leftists like Jared Ball are in opposition to us anyways. He's not radical enough to fight for what we're talking about.
Where this makes particular sense for me, the ADOS side of things, is in the reparations argument. So I'll argue against it at first, just very briefly. You can make an intersectional argument that a lot of people, whether you're a descendant of a slave or not, if you're living in a society that has prejudices against you, that's going to suppress you economically, socially, in all these different ways. On the other hand, American descendants of slavery would be the people who would have had the deepest and the most, clearly economic grievances. They were made promises that were never kept, that kind of thing. And so from a reparations side, if you're going to push for that, which in a weird way we might be in a moment where we could do that, I guess I could see ADOS making sense. But just briefly, what's your take, Dr. Ball?
Can anyone explain to me why the white guys understand this argument better than Jared Ball, and also they believe that this is actually possible? Fucking white people believe that this is a greater possibility than the fucking black man that's supposed to be an activist that fights for us.
It's not that their argument fundamentally doesn't have validity. In fact, what I'm trying to say is they take very old arguments and rebrand them in a conservative way. So, of course, black people deserve reparations. Of course, black people deserve reparative justice in ways maybe perhaps no other group does. But that's not the point I'm raising. The point I'm raising is their argument is to get that reparations, we need to cut ourselves off from every other group, have no solidarity with any other group, certainly not the diaspora, cut ourselves off from our own black American radical traditions, and put our stock solely within a conservative white American populace with the expectations that they will vote, as would have to be expected to about 2/3 of the populace, to redirect funds just to black Americans, when we can't even get white Americans to stop killing and imprisoning black Americans, never mind redirecting funds that they want themselves. So the idea that poor and working class Americans who themselves are doing worse and worse off even after COVID are going to then turn around and side with this reparations move is absurd. But what they're really doing is claiming reparations while dragging black Americans back to the most conservative elements of political activism, when in fact the reparations movement should be buttressed by supplemented with their efforts by expanding existing efforts, which have all kinds of tactics, which involve approaches to the UN, solidarity with other groups, reparations globally for African diaspora enslavement, etc.
So we got to be clear. He's arguing that it would be impossible to convince the rest of America to have solidarity with the black Americans who descend from American chattel slavery for the purpose of doing reparative justice. But somehow the more plausible tactic would be to get the whole globe on the same accord. Everybody that has been involved in the slave trade and colonizing Africa, we're going to be able to convince the whole fucking globe to get on one accord to pay reparations to every black person. This is the shit he's arguing is more plausible than doing reparations to one group in one nation, like America has already done with other groups.
Which would strengthen the argument for black people here. And that has been the part that this ADOS group always wants to deny and ignore, because they want to be the singular spokespeople when they themselves have individually as the leadership itself, but ideologically more broadly, deep connections with the conservative white supremacist element of this country. So it's a false flag. It's a mythological claim that they're running when dragging us all the way back to the right. So again, this is not a discussion of whether or not we deserve reparations. It's a question of what tactics, what pathway will get us to that reparations, and cutting ourselves off aggressively and with hostility from all these other groups that could be potential allies and have been for decades is absurd. Finally, what we should be doing is calling for institutional public policy redistribution of the gross domestic product of this country, which before COVID was well over $20 trillion, which if redistributed appropriately through public policy institutionally would take care of the material needs of everybody in this country. So it's not to say that black people don't have deserve more maybe than other groups.
No, that's exactly what you're saying. Why are you trying to run from that position?
But it's to say that tactically, if everybody is taken care of, then black people will end up finding themselves better taken care of, and then can, on their own, in our own ways, take care of the missing pieces of that reparative justice that can't come from public policy or material redistribution of resources that we all help to create.
So the radical leftist position is to avoid a fight for justice and to tell the victims to get over it. And Jared Ball is doing this because he's saying that white people are too racist to do anything like reparative justice for slavery, black code laws, Jim Crow, redlining, and etc. So instead of getting what is owed to us, we are supposed to take the crumbs of some universal program, and with those crumbs, we are supposed to then heal ourselves, because that has to be on us instead of the government that has committed generations of racial discrimination and atrocities against us. He is letting them off the hook and then putting all the responsibility onto us. What part of this is supposed to appeal to black people? If anything, this would appeal to a white supremacist.
But that kind of redistributionist effort would be much more radical, progressive, and encompassing, but it's something that people like this don't want to engage because it takes away their cottage industry of being conservative black spokespeople leading us nowhere.
Interesting. Okay, this is all outside of my field of comprehension. Very interesting take. A lot to breathe in and think about there. Dr. Ball, thank you for joining us.
We have one more. We have Patrick from Memphis.
Stedman calling in from Detroit. Stedman, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, guys. I guess I'm going to be calling about ADOS too. I participate in some of the organizing here in Detroit. On a local level, I try to do some political organizing. And I think, again, like everybody else said, it's really a misrepresentation. ADOS stands for the descendants of American slaves to have a stake in the country they built. And so when you look at the data of the country, you see immigrants from other countries, black immigrants, who are able to take advantage of specific policies like affirmative action that are supposed to be geared for the descendants of slaves in America to excel in this country, and they're taking advantage of them. And the reason they are is because, well, Jamal always talks about class. A lot of immigrants who come to America, though they may have black skin like me or Jamal, don't have a history of that disadvantage. They're usually upper class immigrants, and so they have an opportunity to take part in a certain class dynamic. Like I have a coworker, I just work at the airport, but I have a coworker from Cameroon. His father was a government official in Cameroon, but due to civil war or whatever, he's over here. But he's like getting his degree in chemical engineering. I can't do that. Nobody in my family went to college, right? My grandfather didn't finish the 8th grade. So there's a difference between us. When you look at Haitian immigrants, they're not taking the Haitian immigrants who are on the as far as socioeconomically, who mirror us here. They're taking those who have degrees or who have skill or who have influence in their own country, and they bring them here and they put them on a pedestal. And so we're locked out of opportunity that is specifically geared up for us. There's a color of wealth data chart you can look up online that breaks down in major cities around the country the disparity between ADOS Black Americans and Black immigrants. And I think in Florida, ADOS Americans have about $11 of wealth, while foreign Black immigrants have like $200. And while those numbers are still drastically insignificant, it says something when a person whose family has been in the country for 400 years, who's built a country for 400 years for free, is struggling with first-generation immigrants. You know, you don't see that anywhere else in the
Stedman,
world.
I hear what you're saying. We've got to go. We're in our last minute here. We do not have time to take Patrick or Malik. I'm sorry about that. Please call back in tomorrow. For everybody listening, thank you so much for listening to today's show. I also want to send a quick shout out to our producers, the Shannon Racine, as well as engineer Andre.